You think you fear death, but you don't. What truly paralyzes you every day isn't the end. It's everything you fail to live before it arrives. I used to believe my fear was of her, of that final moment, that last breath, that instant when everything goes dark. But that night, when I finally looked death in the eyes, I discovered the real terror doesn't live in the last second. It hides in all the ones we waste before it. I can't say whether I went looking for her, or whether she called me. All I remember is the sense that the world was suspended. Every sound seemed muffled, as if even the wind hesitated to cross the street. There was a strange pressure in the air, not the emptiness of silence, but the charged stillness that lives in the moment before a thunderclap. When I saw her, there were no lightning bolts, no supernatural darkness. She was simply there. And in that instant, I understood something. Death doesn't need spectacle to be felt. Her presence is subtle, yet inescapable, like a memory you've tried to bury that suddenly sits down across from you. I didn't know if I should speak, but one question burned in my throat. It might be my only chance to ask it. So, with a trembling voice, I said, "What do you know about fear?" She didn't answer immediately. She only tilted her head slightly, like someone studying a secret that's just about to be revealed. And in that pause, I realized her answer wouldn't just change what I knew about fear. It would change how I lived every day I had left. It was late afternoon when I found the place. A small cafe, almost forgotten, at the end of a narrow street that seemed to lead nowhere. The facades around it were worn down, as if they'd been left to fight time alone. The windows, even closed, leaked an ancient chill, not the kind that comes from weather, but the kind that settles in places carrying too many stories. The air smelled of recent rain, mixed with coffee that had been sitting for hours, as if every molecule carried a trace of memory. The light spilling through the window was neither golden nor gray. It was hesitant, like even the sun couldn't decide whether to stay or go. Inside, the sound shifted. The distant hum of the street died the moment you crossed the door. No music, no conversation. Only the occasional clink of a cup being set on the counter and the faint creak of old wood beneath my steps. The walls were stained with time, lined with crooked frames whose images had long since faded. The air felt heavier here, as if you had to breathe slower. It was the kind of place where time doesn't flow. It folds, loops, and watches itself. Few tables were occupied, yet it felt as if every corner was full, not of people, but of presences. Invisible, silent, watchful. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a cafe, it was a waiting point. A place that existed not to serve coffee, but to host meetings that couldn't happen anywhere else in the world. She was there, not sitting casually, but as though that had been her seat long before the cafe existed. In the farthest corner, her back to the wall, facing the door, the posture of someone who is never surprised. Her hands rested together on the table, perfectly still, as if the act of waiting itself was part of some ritual. There was nothing grotesque about her. No scythe, no billowing cloak, no glowing skull. Death, at least here, wasn't the caricature we invent to keep our fear at a safe distance. She wore something plain, belonging to no particular time or fashion. A light hood covered part of her face, revealing only the line of her jaw and the faint curve of lips that neither smiled nor threatened. And yet, I knew she could see me completely, not as a stranger walking in, but as someone whose inner map she knew by heart. With a single glance, it felt as if invisible fingers turned the pages of my life, reading every detail, every choice, every silence. When our eyes met, there was no shock, no jolt, only a strange acceptance, as though some part of me had always known this meeting was set the day I was born. I walked to the table. My footsteps sounded louder than they should in the thick silence. When I sat down, I noticed there were no cups, no glasses, no physical barrier between us. Only the exact space needed for words to cross. She didn't speak. She only tilted her head slightly, as if saying without saying, "So, you came." And somehow I understood this moment wasn't about her finding me. It was about me finally finding the courage to meet her. I didn't know where to begin. It was strange, sitting across from her and feeling all the questions I'd gathered in a lifetime colliding in my mind, fighting to be asked first. But as loud as those questions were inside me, I realized none of them was truly the most important. Because deep down, what I needed to know wasn't about the end. It was about the now, about what keeps me from living fully before the end arrives. My throat was dry, yet the words came almost effortlessly, as if they'd been waiting for this moment and couldn't wait any longer. What do you know about fear? The question hung between us, heavy, unhurried. I didn't even know if I wanted to hear the answer. Maybe I feared she'd confirm what I already sensed, that fear doesn't live in the moment of departure, but in a life left unspent. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She only held that gaze, not a physical look, but an absolute one. It wasn't my eyes she was seeing through, but everything I was. I felt exposed in a way no confession, no examination, no intimacy could ever reproduce. The question seemed to echo in the air, as if the cafe walls absorbed it, only to give it back later. What do you know about fear? I almost repeated it, thinking she hadn't heard. But then I realized this wasn't the silence of distraction. It was the silence of someone weighing every second before releasing a truth that could change how you see your own life. And in that instant, I knew her answer would not come quickly, because the most important answers never do. Her silence wasn't empty. It was dense, almost tangible, filling the space between us. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something greater, like the air itself holding its breath. I could hear my own heartbeat, not because it was racing, but because the rest of the world seemed to have vanished. No footsteps outside, no cars passing, no clinking cups at the counter. Only that silence, standing between us like an invisible wall. She didn't look away, and I understood that this moment, uncomfortable as it was had a purpose. It was as if she were testing me, not to see if I had the courage to face the answer, but to see if I had the patience to bear the weight of waiting for it. With each passing second, the room seemed to change. The light through the window dimmed, as though the sun were quietly retreating, so nothing would compete with this moment. Even the scent of coffee faded, leaving only a strange, almost metallic freshness in the air. I felt the temptation to break the silence, to say something, anything, to release the pressure. But something inside me knew that speaking now would ruin whatever was about to happen. It would be like interrupting a musician before the final note, or opening your eyes in the middle of a dream that still had more to show you. So I waited, and I realized she was already teaching me something, that sometimes silence isn't emptiness, but when she finally moved, there was no haste. She simply lifted her chin slightly, and in that simple gesture, I knew the answer was coming. "Fear," she began, and her voice was nothing like I'd imagined. There was no supernatural echo, no deep, eternal resonance. It was an ordinary voice, but heavy in a way that didn't come from sound, only from meaning. "Is not what you think it is." She paused briefly, as if giving me time to let the words sink in, and to let them cut deeper. "You, the living, believe you fear me. You spend your lives trying to avoid me, outwit me, delay me, but I am not what keeps you awake at night." Whatever lay under her hood seemed to pierce straight through me. What truly paralyzes you is the life unlived. A shiver rose in me that had nothing to do with cold. She spoke not like someone giving an opinion, but like someone stating a fact. "It's not the last day that haunts you," she went on, "but all that you fear the final moment. But it's the first moment you ignore that begins to kill you from the inside." Her tone carried no judgment, only recognition. Like someone who had witnessed the same scene millions of times, knowing it would repeat until the last human breath. "True fear," she said, leaning forward slightly, "is not of the end. It's of arriving at it and realizing it wasn't enough." I wanted to ask, enough for what? But no sound came. Maybe because deep down, I already knew. Maybe because I'd realized in that moment that the real question wasn't how to avoid death, but how to avoid living a life that leaves nothing behind. She leaned back slightly in her chair, as if opening an invisible album of memories. "I once knew a man who spent 40 years saying he would write a book," she began. "He had ideas, stories, even a title. He filled notebook after notebook with notes. But he always said he needed more time before he could start. When the end came, he begged me for one more month, not to live, but to write the first page." She paused briefly. He never realized that the first chapter had been overdue since the day he was born. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table lightly, as if turning a page. There was also a woman who spent her life taking photographs, but never appeared in any of them. She feared she wasn't pretty enough, young enough, thin enough. When I came for her, her phone was full of faces that weren't hers. She wept because, among all the memories she had kept, there was no proof she had ever existed for herself. Silence returned for a moment, but she wasn't finished. "And a young man," she continued, who said he would love when the time was right. He saved his words, saved his touch, saved his gaze. He waited for life to give him a sign. The sign came, but he didn't recognize it. And when he finally did, she was living another story, somewhere else. The stories were simple, yet suffocating in their weight. No spectacular tragedies, no accidents or disasters, just small daily abdications, so ordinary we hardly notice when we make them. When she stopped speaking, I knew these weren't just about people she had met. They were about all of us, about every moment we let life slip away, while we wait for something that will never come. You live as if life were a rehearsal, she said, with the calm of someone stating an undeniable truth. You postpone everything, as if a second chance were guaranteed. But the stage is the same for everyone, and the curtain falls without warning. Her words had no urgency, yet each one found its exact place inside me. You fear exposure, fear mistakes, fear loss. So you hide what you feel, conceal what you dream, and wait for the way she spoke wasn't condemning. It was almost compassionate, like someone who has seen the same error repeated too many times to still be angry about it. Your fear isn't of me, she continued. It's of looking in the mirror on your last day and realizing you were only a spectator of your own life. You confuse safety with meaning. You think protecting yourself is living, but in truth, you're only prolonging an absence. She paused, as if searching for the precise word. Life is not measured by how long it lasts, but by how much of you was truly in it. Her tone was firm, though never cold. When the end arrives, it's not death that hurts. It's the inventory of chances you let slip away. I felt those sentences weren't just an answer to my question. They were a warning, not only for me, but for anyone still believing that living can be delayed. She leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on the table. Her tone shifted. She didn't smile, but there was something almost human in her expression. I am not the punishment. I am the consequence. Her gaze seemed to narrow, as if making sure I understood. The real sentence is to arrive at me and realize you only existed, but never lived. That moment wasn't like hearing a lesson. It was like having the ground itself shift beneath me. This wasn't about fearing death. It was about fearing a life so cautious that when the end came, there would be nothing worth remembering. And I understood right then that what terrified me most was already happening. She leaned back again, as if opening one last drawer of memories that needed to be shown. I knew a man who dreamed of traveling the world. He saved money for decades, waiting for the perfect retirement. When the day finally came, his body no longer had the strength for long flights or the stamina for the roads. ... He told me, I just wish I'd started with less. She turned her face slightly, as if looking at another scene, and there was a young man who wanted to ask for forgiveness. He knew he'd been wrong. He knew to whom, and he even knew what he'd say. But he thought it would be easier when things calmed down. Except things never calm down on their own. And one day, it was too late. Her stories had no heroes, no villains, just ordinary people living ordinary days, always postponing what mattered, and yet the weight was immense. "You think death comes as a single blow," she said, turning her eyes back to me. "But for many, it arrives in small installments. With every later you speak, a piece of what could have been ceases to exist." Her words echoed inside me, and I couldn't help but think that maybe, at that very moment, I was also paying one of those installments, sitting there, realizing that every weight is not neutral. It's a choice that takes its toll. "You believe time is something you own," she said, with the serenity of someone in no rush. "But time isn't yours. It's a loan, and each day, part of it is collected, whether you use it or not." She tilted her head slightly, and I realized her gaze wasn't cold. It was a kind of compassion that exists only when there are no illusions left. To live is to accept that you'll hurt, to accept that you'll lose, to accept that you'll fail. But it's also the only way to feel what's worth feeling. You try to keep me at a distance by avoiding risk, but that only brings the end closer. Because life without risk isn't life. It's waiting. The silences between her sentences were like a metronome. She knew exactly where to place them, so each word would lodge deep. "Fear of me is useless," she said. "Fear of not living enough. Now that can save you." It wasn't comfort. It wasn't advice. It was a silent order. Stop waiting. Stop rehearsing. Stop stacking days with no story. When she leaned back in her chair again, I knew there was nothing more to add. The lesson had been given. And the worst, or perhaps the best, part. She didn't say goodbye. No handshake, no final word. Just the faintest shift, as if gravity had changed direction for an instant. And then she was simply absent. She didn't vanish in smoke or light. She simply stopped occupying space, as if she had never been there, and yet as if she always had. The cafe was the same. Worn walls, scent of damp wood, hesitant light through the window. But something had changed, and it wasn't the place. It was me. I sat there for a while, unsure how long. The silence was no longer heavy, only different. It carried no expectation, only an invitation. As if every sound outside, footsteps on the sidewalk, a distant car, the slam of a door, was a reminder that time was still moving and that I was still inside it. When I finally stood, I noticed there was no bill to pay, perhaps because in a way, the price had already been collected in another form. Stepping out into the street, the cool air, not a promise of eternal life, but of days made full, if I had the courage to fill them. And then I remembered her words, "Fear of not living enough. That indeed can save you." I understood it wasn't about racing against time, but about stopping it from running on without me. I walked down the narrow street, knowing that while I couldn't avoid the final meeting, I could avoid the regret. Death had shown me she was not my enemy. My real enemy would be the version of myself who, on the last day, looked back and saw nothing. And in that moment, I decided that version would never exist.